Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Discussion Group. The ambition for this program is to have a thoughtful conversation on a variety of subjects. Today's topic is vegetarianism. We'll be discussing the health benefits, the ethical concerns for the treatment of animals, and the positive environmental impacts that a vegetarian diet brings. Vegetarianism is the practice of abstaining from consuming meat. Today we have a spectrum of panelists that have different diets and nutrition that should make for a good discussion. Myself, I am a vegetarian. Erin, I understand that you're a vegan.
Mostly.
And Holly, I understand that you've been slowly limiting what meats you do eat.
Yes, I have. That's correct.
Okay, very nice. I have a first clip that kind of goes into what vegetarianism is. We can take a look at that. And then when we come back from the clip, I'd like to maybe talk about the reasons why and when you decided to limit consumption of meat. And in your case, why you gave up meat altogether, and kind of have the conversation take place from there.
Okay.
Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right, let's take a look.
A traditional vegetarian diet consists of mainly fruits, vegetables, legumes, grains, seeds, and nuts. Lacto-ovo vegetarians, one of the most common forms, also eat eggs and dairy. Pescatarians include fish, while vegans exclude all animal products. Experts say a plant-based diet can be the way to go.
The evidence regarding vegetarianism is really overwhelming, and it shows that plant-based diets are probably one of the best things that we can do for our bodies. They help to lower your body weight. They might reduce the risk of some cancers. Plant-based diets can also be great for lowering the risk of heart disease and even helping people live a little longer.
There are no major health risks unless you don't get the recommended intake of vitamins and nutrients. Vegetarians should pay attention to these categories in particular: protein, calcium, iron, vitamin D, and vitamin B12. Contrary to popular belief, it's easy to incorporate protein and calcium into a meatless diet.
There's a lot of protein in plant-based foods. Probably the most important thing is to make sure if you're vegan and you cut out any eggs or milk, then you're getting high quality protein from things like beans, quinoa, grains, soy products, tofu. Good ways to get calcium if you're not eating any dairy products is to do leafy greens. They're actually a good source of calcium, as well as almonds, sesame seeds, tofu, soy milk. Those are all great sources of calcium.
You can get iron from beans and leafy greens. Vitamins D and B12 are other important nutrients. It's important for vegetarians to make sure they're getting a balanced diet to meet daily nutritional requirements.
I do recommend that you don't try to do it overnight, that you start to incorporate more plant-based diets into your day. You probably heard of meatless Mondays. One thing that you can do is just decide that you're going to have no meat on Monday and maybe eventually make that into Friday and Wednesday.
Whether it's a form of vegetarianism or not, choose the right diet to meet your health needs.
Okay, well, there you go. I'll start off. I've been a vegetarian for about 17, 18 years now. The reason I first became a vegetarian was for a healthy lifestyle. And over time, though, the ethical treatment of animals started to be a factor as well. But when I became vegetarian, I noticed I lost weight, I felt better, I felt I looked better as well, and it was gradual at first. I got rid of beef, and then I got rid of chicken, and so forth, and so that was for probably the first 6 months, but I'll never go back. But that's the reasons why I became a vegetarian. You're a vegan, or you're trying to be a vegan. What led you to, and when did this happen?
This happened almost 2 years ago. My son actually dared me. He was like, I don't think, because I had been talking about it for so long, how I wanted to, and like years. And he was like, on the internet, there's all these like challenges that always are happening, like 7-day challenges. So he was like, I bet you can't go 1 week doing vegan diet. And I was like, okay, let's do this together. So we did it together, and he lasted 4 whole days.
Better than you thought, maybe.
I thought he was going to stick it out, honestly, but it was a miserable first 3 days. It was terrible, because he starved himself. He didn't want to try anything new. I refused to starve myself, so I just tried to figure it out, and my body was definitely going through a detox. I basically lived on cheese and you don't think about that stuff. Like when all you eat is meat and cheese for every single meal,
Right.
you don't think outside that box ever. So
Wait, you were eating cheese, vegan cheese, or
no,
Oh, so this is when you went vegetarian.
this is a couple years ago. I was just eating the same diet that everybody else in the world eats,
okay.
and he was like, let's do this vegan diet for a week. I bet you can't. And I was like, hold my beer, son.
So after you initially started doing it, after a while, did you notice how
After
you
4
felt?
days. It was the fourth day. That was the day that he broke and he just couldn't do it anymore. And I woke up on the fourth day feeling amazing. Like my energy was like through the roof. My skin started to clear up because I had broken out like I was a teenager again in that little 3-day period.
Yeah.
I just felt good. By the end of that first week, people were like, your skin looks amazing. Like, you look so much better. I did lose a little bit of weight, which I didn't really need to. But, you know.
So how about since? Or do you think you'll continue to be a vegan?
I'm pretty sure, I mean, I still have fish every once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see myself ever going back to eating any kind of meat or dairy
Yeah.
or anything.
Yeah, I feel like it takes a little effort, but once you start going along for a while,
Yeah.
it gets easier, and you start to see the effects of it, and you don't want to go back.
Yeah.
Now, I know we had discussions before the show that you've been limiting the meat that you've been eating. And
I have, yes.
So talk about that a little bit.
Well, it started actually quite a long time ago, but it was a slower progression, if you will. So probably about maybe 20 years ago was when I had decided that I had given up all red meat and pork.
Mm-hmm.
For reasons just that I didn't care for it. We kind of grew up with it. My mother made a lot of red meat and beef and all this other stuff, and I never really liked it as a kid, but you have what you have.
Right.
And so as I became an adult, I decided I don't have to have this anymore. I don't enjoy it. I don't want it. So it was very, very easy to cut it out of my diet because I didn't like it to begin with. So 20 years later, I still haven't gone to any kind of red meat or pork. So what's happened over the course of the more recent years, I've started to cut out the amount of chicken or turkey that I might eat.
Mm-hmm.
I do enjoy seafood, so I do eat a lot of seafood, but I think I'm just becoming a little bit more aware when it comes to the cruelty aspect
Yeah.
of how we get any kind of meat, and I think that's what's really starting to turn me off to even just chicken or anything that I might have had that was meat related.
Right.
So I really am cutting a lot of it out in my diet, and it's been pretty easy. I think the only difficulty is when you go out to eat, and I'm sure maybe both of you know. I mean, there's certain things that are more restricting. I mean, everything's kind of based around like meats and
Yeah.
fish and dairy, and so it makes it a little bit more difficult. So like when I do go out to eat, it's kind of always a go-to. So I haven't been able to eliminate that yet.
Right. And you kind of hit on something that I was thinking about when we were preparing to do this show. Is our upbringing, when you're growing up, and then your parents' upbringing and so forth, it's just learned like, well, okay, my family was meat and potatoes. That just seemed normal to me. I mean, I didn't know. You don't know. So you only are going by the information your parents had, or what was at the dinner table, and then their parents, and so on and so forth. So, it's easy to see why we eat the way we do until, I guess, a little bit later you start to read more, you start to understand things, and you say, you know what, I think I'm going to give this a shot, because there are health reasons, there are treatment of animal reasons, there are environmental reasons, but it comes back to, well, this is how I grew up, I just don't know any different, and I don't know how to shop for food differently, I don't know, and so I think that's part of it. It's a learning process, and it was for me. If you're not going to have a steak, well, what's your main course? Well, if you're not going to have chicken,
Yeah.
I mean, and you have to sort of figure it out,
And even, I know that you said it as well, when you were doing your trial with your son. He didn't want to try things, but you had to kind of go out, and I think that can be a little daunting if you don't know, like,
Yeah.
What recipes do you use? Like, what, how you now cook on a daily basis for 3 meals a day, excluding whether it be meat or dairy or whatever it is. It can be very difficult. It can be really hard, and sometimes it gets frustrating. So it's easy just to go back to what you know,
right?
Because of the frustration. So.
And that's one thing, though, is it does make you read the ingredients in boxes more, and read the ingredients in the food that you're purchasing, and you start to realize things in there that you never thought about before, and you're like, holy crap, I'm eating some really terrible stuff, So you become more aware, and I think that it just snowballs, and you're like, well, I'm not going to have this, I'm not going to have that. But speaking to your point of, okay, well, what do we have? All right, I'm going to be a vegetarian, and what is out there, and it takes time, and I'm not trying to advertise certain products or this or that, but when people ask me, like, Jeff, I want to try it, like 2 meals a week, vegetarian, but what do I have? There are things out there. If you're like me and you're in a hurry and you don't want to spend a lot of time in the kitchen, it's hard to try to eat healthy and be kind of in a hurry. But there are things like there's Boca burgers, Morningstar burgers, Quorn, starts with Quorn. They're not chicken, but it's sort of mycoprotein or mushroom based. There are all kinds of things out there. But I feel like when I first started going vegetarian, I never noticed that section of the supermarket. It wasn't until I was going down that path that I said, oh, there's this whole other, that's where people wandered. I always wondered where they were going. Is there a chocolate river back there? But you don't see it until you start, looking for it.
Yeah. The one thing that saved my life in the beginning of my process was the Forks Over Knives app. There's an app called Forks Over Knives, and there's also a documentary called Forks Over Knives, which everybody should watch if you haven't already.
Yeah.
It's amazing. But it's basically an app that is all plant-based diets. Recipes, the whole thing, desserts, sides, sandwiches, one pot stuff, like it's all in there, and it makes it super easy. So after about 2 weeks of using that app exclusively, I started to be like, okay, because it made me think about vegetables that I normally wouldn't look at, you know what I mean? And it helped me to understand how to put things together, you know what I mean, and feed myself. Yeah. And it, I still use it from time to time, but now I have an internal base of just okay, now I know how to piece things together and make an actual meal out of this instead of just having a side of broccoli. Which I do all the time, actually. You can eat a bowl of broccoli and feel amazing. It's really kind of all you need sometimes. But
sounds like a good tool. You actually got me on. I'm a vegetarian. I'm not vegan, but I find myself slowly getting there because dairy is something that I found difficult to give up. Not so much milk. We drink soy milk or almond milk at our house, and cereal and so forth. Cheese was very difficult.
Cheese is always hard.
That's what I thought my downfall would be.
You introduced me to,
chow
and
cheese.
Again, it's chow cheese, and I'm not trying to say, this is an ad, but it's really good, and I can't tell the difference, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
And that's soy based, and it's delicious.
Yeah.
So, and that's another thing. I feel like the more that we become a vegetarian, more vegetarians there are, the more the food manufacturers will start to pay attention to that.
That's happening. The demand is out there because you never thought you would see the day where Burger King and McDonald's would offer a veggie burger.
Yeah.
But it's there because people they're waking up. They have no choice but to follow that trend.
I agree. I think you see more now than we probably have in a lot of prior years. More options of people
everywhere, even at the beach,
purchasing and going out and finding things that might fit their dietary restrictions or what they like to eat, or I think you see it more now for sure.
But like you were saying, there's still though, we'll go out to eat at a restaurant and it's a little difficult.
Yep. Yep. I agree.
It can be, but you can still I ask for things if there's a some sort of dish that calls for chicken or fish. If I'm not trying to have fish that night, I'll just be can I have that without the protein on it? You know what I mean? And or sometimes if I'm really kind of going overboard and I want seafood, I do it at work every once in a while. Can I get a scampi? Really go for it. Just no dairy. No dairy at all, please. And they kind of ugh. okay, but I'd rather have that with no dairy than,
Right.
I don't want it in my body.
Right. No, I understand. Well, let's go into the next segment. I have a clip that talks about the health benefits of a vegetarian diet,
Okay.
And then we can talk about it after we watch it. Lower cholesterol, lower heart disease. Let's take a look.
Ever crave a juicy steak or tender serving of filet mignon? Well, you may be better off craving something other than red meat.
A team of researchers at Loma Linda University Health have been investigating lifestyle and health for nearly 60 years in what's known as the Adventist Health Studies. What they've found is those who eat a vegetarian diet have a lower risk for chronic diseases, which ultimately translates into longer, healthier living.
In our study, the vegetarians compared to the non-vegetarians do have a lower risk of chronic disease, a lower risk of high blood pressure, a lower risk of high cholesterol, a lower risk of diabetes, they're less obese, and a lower risk of dying from heart disease ultimately.
The researchers recently discovered that vegetarians are 22% less likely to develop colorectal cancers, the second leading cause of cancer death in the United States.
So how can you start eating a vegetarian diet and experience the lifestyle benefits? If giving up meat entirely is too much, why not reconsider how often you eat meat? For example, try eating only fish, or eat other meats only once a week to experience similar health benefits associated with the vegetarian lifestyle. The second tip is to eat fewer refined foods like sugar, desserts, snack foods, and fast food meals.
Instead, we should eat more whole grains and natural foods like fruits, vegetables, legumes, and nuts.
The closer you get to some kind of natural state, growing your own garden, shopping at a local farmer's market, that can be very helpful.
If you commit to following these tips, you can enjoy the benefits of lowering your risk for chronic disease and living 6 to 9 years longer.
There's your tip for the day on how you can live healthier, longer.
Okay, well, there we go. So, I think that's generally common knowledge. Maybe not, though, that a vegetarian diet does have a lot of health benefits. Have you found when you talk to people who are not vegetarian that they know that, or?
I think it's people who, I don't know, there's different types of people. You know what I mean? So there seems to be sometimes you can talk about that and people are open-minded, and a lot of the times I feel it makes people extremely uncomfortable. You know what I mean? It brings on this edge, and you can feel it immediately when you start. If you mention that you're vegan, you know what I mean? People kind of bristle and they're just like, ugh, and I think that it makes people uncomfortable because of something inside them. They just don't want to hear it. They don't want to know. They don't want to dive into that. They're just like, I've always eaten meat and we're at the top of the food chain and that's what makes sense. You know what I mean? And it can be hard to get through to people like that and have the conversation.
Yeah, and I think I know some people think that certain vegans have a militant attitude, and there's always going to be people who are super passionate about it, and it might come across and rub somebody the wrong way. But that's a few people in any sort of thing that you have a passion on, so they shouldn't affect the whole conversation. Yeah. Over and over preparing for the show, we watched some clips and I read some articles. They always talk about gradually getting into vegetarianism. And I know we were talking about that before we started rolling the cameras, that, why not go cold turkey? That's probably the wrong word to say for a vegetarian conversation.
Cold tofurkey.
Go cold tofurkey. You can do it that way. For me, it was gradual, but when I started reading about the health benefits, it started to hit home. You look at our population and, we're not doing so well. Yeah. Other countries outside the U.S. have a higher life expectancy, and there are many reasons for that, but I think some of them, a major part of it is diet.
This is this is an obese country.
It is very much so.
It's disgusting.
Yeah.
And it's normal.
It's funny, I was looking at a picture book. My daughter and I were at the bookstore some years ago, and it was I forget what it was, the 30th anniversary or something of Woodstock, of the music festival, and they had a picture book of all the different pictures and so forth, and they're just kids and, teens and early 20s, and as far as the eye could see, and they're having a good time, but something odd struck me. And I'm not saying this to sound mean or anything, but it hit me that there weren't any obese people. There weren't any, I couldn't find any overweight people in the pictures, and there were thousands of people. And I started to think about the American diet since, when processed foods came into play and the fast food restaurants. And we sort of got away from the homegrown, you sit at the table and, and even then, those were not vegetarian meals, but they probably were a little more wholesome, or the ingredients were more wholesome. But something has happened, and from that time into now, it got very easy and our lives got very busy. So there might be a lot of reasons. I don't know. Yeah. When you started limiting your meat, did you start to feel a little bit better, or?
Yes, I guess so. I mean, I don't eat a whole lot of meat to begin with. I think where it was really difficult for me on the health aspect of it was I was always taught that, especially say like chicken, is very high in protein. So when I started to take my health more serious, and I decided that I wanted to start to work out more, and I was doing more lifting, if you will, so I was really focusing on getting a lot of protein in my diet, and all the recipes and things that I was reading for people that are trying to build muscle, everything was chicken. Like, chicken is a great way, 3-4 times a day, everything was chicken. So in my mind, I thought, well, that's what I need to eat then. Like, I really need to be double dosing on that if I really want to get the protein that I need in order to achieve what I wanted to physically. And then as I started to read more, and then wanting, just on my own, just wanting to kind of eliminate meat a little bit more, is when I started to find some more options. And even like we were saying, with protein powders for shakes and such, and everyone always said, whey protein is the way to go, and it's meat based, or it's animal based. And then when I started to look at protein powders, I found that they are excellent. They're wonderful. They have as much, if not more, protein content than the latter, and it's much easier on your stomach as well. It's easier to digest. So I found that going with plant-based protein powders has definitely made a huge impact, and it's been great. So now I've been able to cut back on, say, the protein that I was getting through chicken or white meat, and therefore replacing it with other options as far as for lunches and dinners, because I'm getting my protein other way.
Right. You always hear the protein argument. It's an old argument. And we were talking about this before we started rolling the cameras today, but essentially all protein comes from plants. If cattle's grazing, they're grazing on plants. But there are plenty of proteins that you can get on a vegan or vegetarian diet where you're not having a deficiency in that area. What do you usually eat? Do you eat a lot of beans, or what do you get for protein?
I go through phases. I mean, beans are definitely a part of my diet. Lots of vegetables, lots of fruit.
Right.
I do concentrate more on fiber than protein. I just think that people focus way too much on protein, and the intake for the average American person is like 4 times the amount that your body actually needs.
Interesting.
To survive.
Yeah.
Because protein is being shoved down everybody's throat.
Protein.
Brainwashing. Yep. You know what I mean? Conditioning. Just like.
You don't think that's industry related?
It's definitely industry related. Yeah. You need to have this meat to live.
Yep.
Is what they tell you, and it's everywhere, and it's so normal that nobody thinks about that stuff.
Let's talk about, and maybe we can watch a clip on it. The next part of the discussion I like to talk about is the ethical treatment of animals. And that has when I first became vegetarian, that wasn't the reason why I became one. But over the years, the more I've read, the more I've seen, it has. I'd like to show a clip that's actually more vegan than vegetarian. It's been out for a while, and I know the vegans out there probably are quite aware of it. It's called Dairy is Scary. It's by I think her name's Janice. It's in the clip, but she talks about the dairy industry and cow's milk, and It is a little scary. So I'm just going to warn you, some of the images are not pleasant. But let's take a look at that and then we can talk about it.
Okay guys, so since everyone's so busy these days, I'm gonna explain to you how the dairy industry works in 5 minutes. Like other female mammals, cows only lactate, or produce milk, when they're pregnant or have a newborn to feed. So the dairy industry inseminates or impregnates cows starting at the age of around 12 months over and over and over again so they keep making milk. And it's a rather routine process. You see, first the industry jacks off a bunch of bulls, sometimes using a hand or help from an electro-ejaculator, which is basically a giant cow dildo that goes into the anus of the bull until he blows. And that semen is collected and then inserted into the vagina of a female cow with a long tube, usually while she's confined in what the industry calls a rape rack. And sometimes they put their fist right into the anus of the female cow, to loosen the area.
To make the process as effective as possible.
What are you feeling for in there when it's a bit jumpy? I think I would be if someone did that to me.
Just bringing it out. He massages a little bit just to relax everything and help that semen go where it needs to go.
He must be responsible for a lot of calves.
Yes.
And when that baby cow is born, it's pretty much immediately taken away from its mother and locked in a crate. Because if it stayed around mom, it would drink her milk. And that's for us. And you see, a mother cow's bond with her young is very strong and affectionate, and she sometimes cries out for days in search of her baby. But nobody gives. If the baby's a male, his throat is slit and he's sold for veal. And if it's a girl, she's raised to be a milk machine like mom. So dairy cows are continuously, repeatedly kept pregnant their whole lives to keep them lactating. This leads to premature aging, exhaustion, and mastitis, a painful yet common condition in dairy cows, which is inflammation and sometimes infection of the udder. Pus and blood in the milk of dairy cows is also common, so it's usually filtered. But not completely, because in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, up to 400,000 somatic cells are legally allowed in every milliliter of cow's milk. And in the United States, 750,000 somatic cells per milliliter. In Brazil, 1 million. And somatic cells, most of which in this case are white blood cells, are the same thing that erupt on the top of a big zit, so you could call it pus. The more bacteria, inflammation, and infection, the higher the somatic cell count. But don't worry, there's a limit. And when a dairy cow is finally too physically and emotionally exhausted to continue on, she collapses. These cows are called downers, and they are dragged out by whatever means to be killed and sold for beef. It's common in the industry, even on organic dairy farms, for cows to go down after about 4 or 5 years of continuous milk production. But peak milk production declines around 4 to 5 years anyways, so if the dairy cows are still standing, they're gonna be killed for hamburgers and beef regardless. You see, the dairy industry is the meat industry. Almost every single dairy cow that you will ever buy milk that came from ends up being killed for meat. So if you're vegetarian, you might want to think about this, because at least when you're being raised for meat, you're just raised for meat and killed. But when you're a dairy cow, you are sexually exploited and emotionally and physically exhausted until you can't take it anymore, and then you're killed for meat. Sounds worse to me. And the natural lifespan of a cow that hasn't been completely exploited? 20 to 25 years, y'all. And as far as the calcium and protein thing goes, study after study after study has shown that those consuming the highest quantities of dairy actually have the highest cases of bone fracture and osteoporosis. And there are dozens of amazing plant-based sources of calcium and protein. Try almond milk, hemp milk, soy milk, flax milk, rice milk, Brazil nut milk, macadamia nut milk, cashew milk, any milk but dairy milk.
Okay, well, that was a pick-me-up. That's pretty rough. You know, I'm vegetarian, but when I saw that, I've already been limiting my dairy. I'll be limiting it a lot more. Try to get down to nothing. It's disturbing. It really is.
It's very upsetting.
I feel like when we're kids and, you draw pictures of farms in school, we are still stuck with this image of this, pastoral, idyllic sort of setting where the cows and the chickens just have this sort of peaceful life until slaughter time. It's nothing like that.
Yeah, not at all.
It's not like that at all. It's, these are mammals, and they're sentient beings. They have feelings. Other animals have feelings, and you start to think about that. And this comes back to maybe this is why people get upset, because they don't want to think about these sort of things.
Because there's a guilt inside.
Yeah.
And people will be like, you're making me feel guilty.
Yeah.
But in fact, I can't make you feel anything. If you have guilt inside, that's yours. I can't give that to you. It can open your eyes to some things, you know what I mean? But if you don't have that feeling, you don't have that feeling. Some people just don't care. And some people will just get uncomfortable. And I feel like that's where that inner guilt kind of is just like, that there's something not right with
Because that's
this.
hard to watch. That's really hard to watch. And then to go home and say, okay, well, I watched that, but I'm going to go home and have a glass of milk now. Like, that's really
Or I'm going to have
very
a
difficult to
cheeseburger
do
or
now,
grilled cheese
because
or
it's so heart-wrenching.
ice cream.
So.
Yeah, like, and
Yep.
you don't think, like, every single time you have ice cream or you have a piece of cheese or you have a burger and you're just, like, very, like, vacant about it. You're not mindful of what's actually happening and what you're contributing to.
Right.
You are responsible for killing something or somebody.
Right.
There's an individual there.
And she makes a very good point. You as a vegetarian, you're like, well, I can have dairy because the animal's not dying. Well, no, they're going to send it off to slaughter at the end anyway, after it's gone through this horrible life of constantly being pregnant, so we can drink its milk. It does sound weird, Why are we drinking this other animal's milk?
Nobody does that but us.
It's an oddity.
It's gross.
Yeah.
And it's all about money. It's just greed.
Oh, I know. And she touched on it. The dairy industry, you remember the Got Milk campaigns?
They still do it now. I think they might have switched the slogan a little bit.
They're not allowed to do milk is a body good. It's illegal. They can't.
Really?
Milk
But
is a body good
is
is banned
switched?
because it's a lie. And it's, it's part of that conditioning, like brainwashing. Like any good marketing will do is tell you, you need this. But milk does a body good is banned.
And they would always do it with an athlete. It was always an athlete
because it's been proven that it does a body very, very bad.
It actually does, and she touched on it. And there was a study at UC San Francisco where they tested 1,000 women over 7 years and found that the women with the highest ratio of animal to plant protein had more incidences of bone fracture than women with the lowest ratio. So. And they go on, those women drinking a lot of milk, you think, we've been taught this is calcium.
It's depleting your calcium.
It is. That animal protein calcium, or the animal calcium is, it's depleting it. And they actually have more incidences of fractures and so forth. So you're like, how can this be? We were told differently. And again, I think it comes back to, you can't blame the population so this is all you've known since you've grown up. But once the knowledge is out there, if you don't want to pay attention to it, or then you refuse to listen to it, then maybe that's where the guilt then comes in. Like, well, I do know the information. It is out there. I just don't want to
know it, acknowledge it.
And, there were many clips I could have shown today for farm animals. And again, it's not this idyllic, you look at beef, it's miles and miles of factory farms, and then they're penned up in tight conditions, and they're walking around in their own feces, and it's not pleasant.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a terrible life. They're squeezed together. They can barely move. Pigs are extremely intelligent animals. Some people have them as pets, and their life on a farm is just. It's not a farm, it's a factory farm.
It's the same thing with chickens, it's the same thing with turkeys, it's the same thing with all of the animals.
It's not their,
They're not just hanging out, like living this cool life until they're big enough to slaughter.
Yeah. It's huge tracts of squeezed pens over and over again.
Yeah.
Chickens in cages. I don't know, and what is it?
Even when they say cage-free chickens, they're still in this gigantic warehouse, like with millions of them just piled on top of each other. It's not.
Or even when you're buying eggs now, a lot of them are trying to promote. It says, free range, or
they're not. That just means that there's no cages that they're in, but they're still in one big giant cage.
They can barely move around.
Yeah,
they can't
because there's so many.
And they fatten them so they can't even support their own weight by the time they're a few months old. They're just trying to plump them up with corn.
It's interesting. I used to think, well, farm animals, most of these animals are made by human beings through breeding and artificial selection over centuries, really. You're not going to find any wild chickens out that look like the chickens that we eat or the cows. But I thought, well, that's a false sense of solace, trying to take that these are still sentient beings. They still have feelings, and I've heard people argue, well, plants, you're killing a plant to eat, but plants don't have a nervous system or a structure even related to a nervous system. And actually, more crops are killed to feed farm animals so that we can eat them than us as eating a garden salad. It is, and I think it's a hard thing to face when you face the information. That's where there's a bit of an integrity issue there. I think for me personally, it was. Anyway. Any other thoughts on this subject? I know there were many clips I could have shown, and that was the one I was, because it kind of challenged me a little bit, because I still eat a little bit of dairy. But from chickens to cow to beef to pork.
I just find it really sad that people, like human beings, just have this, like, you hear like a lot when you start delving into this life, like make the connection, you know what I mean? Like that's a line that you'll see over and over again once you're aware of it. Like you make the connection. If you're on Instagram or Facebook and you see somebody posting like that woman, you know what I mean? Like if you go on her Instagram, I bet you $1 million that her hashtags make the connection is in there somewhere. Because people just don't seem to make that connection of like, these are living beings. Right. With thoughts and lives and children, you know what I mean? And human beings in general, it's just such an evil species. Like, we are so conditioned we don't even think about animals as individuals. We don't think about them as any kind of living creatures whatsoever. We think about them as cheeseburgers, belts, shoes, handbags, you know what I mean? Like, geez, it's like, you don't even think about what you're actually doing, like what it is that you're doing. Right. When you buy that purse, when you're like, oh, I love that purse, it's cool, I love those other pants, I love those shoes, I love, Well, when you go out and you see the big fur coats. Yes. It's endless. It goes on forever. Story, right? Yeah. It's just people don't make that connection. Like, what is it that you're actually doing? You're killing things. You're killing somebody. There's torture, there's rape, there's all of it is tied in, and just so you can have a few minutes of pleasure with an ice cream cone, fashion, walking out your door because you want something that looks fashionable, and how did you get that? Oh, I don't want to. People will like justify it, like factory farming with these animals are only bred for that anyway. You know what I mean? But like, we're all living creatures, we're all animals, so why is it okay for us to decide what happens to these animals? Like, they're only here for us. Like, these animals exist on this planet only for our consumption or enjoyment or pleasure. No. So if we were to start having if I wanted to have to my body, I can do whatever I want with it. You know what I mean? I could have kid after kid after kid and sell that child for cannibalism. You know what I mean? Like, that's wrong. And people in this country would be like, eating dogs is wrong. Eating cats is disgusting. You know what I mean? But it's okay for cows, pigs, chickens, because they've made the connection. Yeah. Because you have a dog. Most people have a dog or a cat at home, and you look at that cat, and you're just like, this is the most amazing being, so smart, so loving. You know what I mean? But don't give the same respect to a cow or a chicken or a turkey or a beetle going across your table. Everything is alive and has a purpose on this planet, not just for humans to do whatever we feel like doing with.
Well, we've only been around a short time. There's no guarantees that we're going to be around.
Human beings are not going to be around that much longer. We're ruining this planet at a rapid pace. It's easy to get depressed at that, but there's more to our nature than the negative. There are a lot of positives. And so I don't want to, I find myself, I don't want to dwell on the negatives. I'd rather say we can change. We do have that ability. We've proven it before. There used to be the divine right of kings, for the most part. That's gone.
There used to be slavery. For the most part, that's gone. Women, for millennia, were treated as second-class citizens or property. For the most part, in the developed world, that's gone. So I feel like we can change. It takes us a long time to catch on now. And the way that our technology is going, we're sort of in an adolescent stage of understanding. It takes us a while to understand, and then the change comes. So this is getting a little off subject, but there are positive attributes to our species. So I'm trying to be hopeful. I mean, that was all that was left in Pandora's box after all the demons and diseases came out. Hope was still there. So, we can do good things. And it takes little steps to do it. But unfortunately, we start to run out of time. You make a good point about pets. And I was watching something about whales. There are still some countries on this planet that hunt down whales and slaughter them for things like lipstick or dog food. It's terrible. You watch something like that, and whales are they care for their young. They play. They frolic. They have feelings just like us. You watch something like that, I'm like, that is terrible. Those countries shouldn't be doing that. I'm like, well, wait a minute. We're slaughtering
right here.
Right, day in and day out. Why is it I can make that connection with the whale, but I can't make that connection with the cow? Anyway.
I agree, though.
I have one last clip that I'd like to show, and then we can wrap up. This is from ASAP Science. They're on YouTube. Look them up. They're really good. They make really nice videos. And this gives an idea of what if the world went vegetarian, some of the environmental positives that would come from it. So we'll take a look at that, and then we'll be right back.
Chances are you or someone you know is a vegetarian, so we thought we'd try a thought experiment. What would happen if everyone in the world was suddenly a vegetarian? What effect would it have on our lives and the planet? Before we begin, full disclosure, none of us at ASAP Science are vegetarians, and the worldwide rate of vegetarianism is fairly low, ranging from about 4 to 5% in the US and Canada to a little over 30% in India. As a result, there are currently about 20 billion chickens, 1.5 billion cows, over a billion sheep, and nearly a billion pigs in the world. Without any meat-eating humans to provide a market, whole herds of domestic animals would disappear. And this would free up vast quantities of land. About 33 million square kilometers of land are used for pasture, an area about the size of Africa. And that's not even counting the land used to grow crops exclusively for animal feed. Some of it would be needed for the increased amount of vegetable crops, but much of the land currently used as pasture is actually too dry to grow crops. Without humans adding artificial nutrients, this land could turn to desert, but if properly managed, it's possible that some farmland would return to its natural state of grassland or forest, which could help counteract global climate change. After all, the loss of CO2 absorbing trees cleared for agriculture is a major reason why global levels of CO2 are going up. Cows and other grazers also affect our climate through large amounts of methane production, which has 25 times more potential planet-warming power than CO2. Combined with the loss of forests and other effects, livestock production is responsible for about 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions, which is more than all the world's planes, trains, and automobiles put together. In fact, many scientists believe that reducing meat consumption may be one of the best strategies for managing climate change. A vegetarian diet would also greatly reduce water consumption. Around 70% of global freshwater consumption is used in agriculture. It takes 15,000 liters to make a kilogram of beef, 6,000 liters for pork, and 4,000 liters for chicken. Compare this with 1,600 liters for cereal crops, 900 liters for fruit, and 300 liters for garden vegetables. Of course, a kilogram of meat packs many more calories than the equivalent weight of fruit, but even if you compare the ratio of water per calorie of available food energy, beef is still 5 times more water intensive than fruit, 7 times more than veggies, and 20 times more than cereal. So, are there any downsides to a vegetarian diet? Well, we'd be left without a cheap source for many byproducts byproducts of livestock like leather from animal hides or animal fats, which are used in cosmetics, candles, and detergents. And while vegetable-based alternatives do exist, their production would need to increase, meaning more land dedicated to growing crops and less restored to its natural state. A more complicated fact is that raising and processing animals is a full-time job for more than 1 billion people, most of whom are small-scale farmers in the developing world. While some may be able to move to producing milk or eggs, or even growing vegetable crops, many would be faced with their way of life becoming obsolete. Of course, any increase in vegetarianism is likely to be a gradual process rather than a sudden cutoff, and surprisingly, the trends are actually in the opposite direction. In places like India and China, people are becoming wealthier and, as a result, consuming more meat, which effectively cancels out the declines we see in other countries.
Okay. Well, we could do some good if we freed up some of that land for restoration of forests. And there's lots of, this was very interesting, it will affect climate change. So again, there's just more positives here to take a look at. I was surprised about the methane gas. I had known that methane gas from cows and cattle and grazers was contributing, but I didn't realize to what degree. And I thought that was it was very interesting. Any thoughts about this?
About the methane? Cow farting?
And the environmental impact.
I think the environmental aspect of becoming vegan or vegetarian is not one that's usually brought up. Like, a lot of this was brand new information to me. Like, a lot of the stuff or clips that I've seen, it usually has to do with the treatment of animals, and that's why people decide to become vegetarian, or because of the health benefits of it. But I mean, I don't think the environmental factor is brought up probably as much as it should be, because I think in a lot of facts it's just as important as probably any of the other clips that we've seen or that we've discussed so far. It's just that's one that's not brought up as much.
Right.
So I think maybe if that comes to light a little bit more, with if you look at all three factors as a whole, I think it just makes more sense that no matter how you look at it, whether you want to look at the cruelty of it, if you want to look at the environmental aspect of it, or you're just looking for better health, I mean, there's certainly a reason, I think, for everybody to at least look at it and consider it and think, how can this really benefit me if I either become vegetarian or slowly, you know what I'm saying? Like we were saying, meatless Mondays or whatever it might be. I mean, for you could go, straight in and just kind of give everything up. For me, it's been a little bit more of a progression, and it's just made it easier along the way for me. I think if I had kind of given up everything at once, I don't know if I would have been so successful at it.
Right.
But because I kind of chipped away at it, it's then made it easier for me along the way, because once I get rid of something, now I can work towards something else and say, okay, well, now I'm going to get rid of this as well. So I think however it works for a person, you're still working towards a goal that essentially I think is better for yourself, better for the environment, and for everything else that's included along with it. So
right. Something we didn't touch on in the program is cost. I know a lot of people say, well, it's too expensive. And I was at the supermarket yesterday, and I don't know if you guys do this, and I'm curious. I see what other people are buying, and it's not good. And some of them are doing it for budgetary reasons. You're going to get the cheapest white bread and this and that. And there is a point. It can be a little more expensive to eat healthier. And I don't know what exactly the answer to that is, other than if there's more people over time eating healthier, then the prices will come down.
Absolutely. I believe that 100%.
Yeah.
But I mean, also, people don't understand is that when you're feeding your body incorrectly and you're getting the cheapest thing, like if you're eating meat, high sugar, high processed, cheap 89-cent loaf of white bread, and then you're putting sliced meat in between there with a piece of processed cheese food, you know what I mean, like Kraft Singles, that's only going to satisfy you for a little while, and you're just going to have to eat more of that. If you fuel yourself correctly, you don't need to eat as much as you will.
Right.
So I feel like it balances out. You know what I mean? Like you can be like, oh, look, I spent $100 at the grocery store and got 2 carts full of stuff. Well, that stuff's going to be gone by the end of the week because you're going to be starving every hour and a half because your body's just like empty calories. What is this? It's not helping. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or you could just get what your body actually needs to survive and you're satisfied. I found that to be true, and I'm all over the place.
I think you're right on
Sometimes I'm a
that.
junk food vegan, depending, you know what I mean? But for the most part, I try to really stay mindful of how I'm feeding myself and how it makes me feel and how it gets me through this part of the day.
Right. And, you know, something else to that in the long game is the healthier you eat now, it's actually, you're saving yourself money from the health problems you'll have later, because those are costly. And it might take 10 to 20 years to catch up to you, but
eventually
it will catch up to you. So, but thank you both for being on the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Please join us next time when we hope our guest will be singer Rick Astley. Okay, let me hear you guys talk.
Check one, check one.
Hi.
So sexy.
Hello. Bonjour.